Good morning. Welcome to another in our series of legislative breakfasts brought to you by the Bridport Grange and the Addison County Farm Bureau, and help is also from the Addison County Chamber of Commerce and the Regional Planning Commission. So we're here, as we are every Monday during the legislative session, to talk to our legislators directly and find out what's going on in Montpelier. The rules of the game are that you get 2 minutes to speak, and you'll hear the bell up here. When your time is up, please limit your comments or your questions to that 2 minutes, and we'll get started. So we have a legislator here. Do I only see one legislator? Two. Okay, so all right, if you'd step to the microphone and let us know who you are and what you're doing.
I'm Allison Eastman, and I serve the towns of Benson, Orwell, Shoreham, and Whiting. I sit on the Ag Committee with Harvey, keep him wide awake. We this year have worked on a shelter bill that passed out of our committee pretty friendly, and also the House floor over to the Senate, it's gone. And currently we just passed a pollinator protection committee that's going to look at our decline in pollinators, bees. And let's see what else we're working on. A big hot topic is Vermont Department of Taxes with ag exemptions. That's something that's near and dear to my heart, since I spend my day in the bookkeeping payroll arena at work. So we've been spending, actually we started that last year, and are currently trying to work up some language. What we've found is they tend to look at ag from a perspective that's similar to manufacturing, which does not work for us. One example that's I found kind of entertaining when you're talking with the tax department was on seed. We all thought seed was exempt. It said it on our agricultural exemption forms, and then we found out at one point last year that their interpretation was it's not direct and exclusive to the production of milk. So they said that it was not exempt, and as we know, we passed a water quality bill. We're asking folks to plant cover crops, so this was pretty important to get the seed exemption. And my reply was to the folks at the tax department, so if we didn't plant the seed and we put the seed down the cow's mouth and we got milk, would that be considered direct and exclusive? And he said yes. So because we were growing the seed, it was not tax exempt. So we've come a long ways. We've had them in our committee room many times. They now do believe that seed is exempt, and we're trying to work on the language to see if perhaps we can get them either to understand direct and exclusive with production ag, or remove the direct and exclusive and try to talk prominently as a language, so they will allow things that are not direct and exclusive to the production of milk. So that's what we're working on in my committee, and I'll wait for questions to see what folks need for answers.
Thank you, Allison. Harvey.
Hi, I'm Harvey Smith, and I represent the town of New Haven, Weybridge, and Bridport. And on the Ag Committee, there's not much left to talk about. Allison did a great job. She sits right beside me, so I keep needling her every now and then just to make sure she's paying attention to what's going on. But anyways, we are working on 2 additional bills. One has to do with food safeties, and the federal government put into place a Food Safety Modernization Act, and they're going to, FDA is the ones that are responsible for doing the inspection and the enforcement, and there's a lot of folks in the state of Vermont that would like to have the Vermont Department of Agriculture do that and provide that service for us. So we're talking about that. We also have a forestry bill in place that we only have possession of a portion of the bill, but the bill is basically, the way that it was described to us was give forestry activities the same right to forest as agriculture has the right to be in agriculture. So there are some things about that bill that are going to be challenging, but I think we can get through it and come up with a good piece of legislation in the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey. I hate to do this to you, Senator Ayre, but you're next to introduce yourself and tell us what you're doing.
Good morning. My name is Claire Ayre. I'm serving my 7th term in the Senate. I live in Addison, and I represent all of Addison County plus Buells Gore and Huntington. I serve as chair in the morning on Senate Health and Welfare, and in the afternoon I serve on Senate Finance, the tax committee. Right now we're working on a bunch of healthcare bills. There's a new federally approved setup called an ACO. We're talking about principles of operations to make sure they work the way we hope they'll work. We're working on a pretty comprehensive opioid bill to decrease the number of legally prescribed opiates in the system. They've been overprescribed. Those are the big things.
Okay, so we're open for questions. Who's got the first question? Comments, questions? Just go right ahead to the microphone, if you will.
Yes, hi. I'm Eric Zeus of Whiting. I wanted to know from the three legislators who are present, particularly Claire Ayre, since she happens to be very actively involved in this, what does seem to be the future direction of the Obamacare, in Vermont, and to what one might want to attribute the massive expenditure for the software that apparently does seem to be constantly and repeatedly failing.
Well, I heard two questions. One is about the software, which is the exchange, and it never worked right. We didn't do it right. We've been through a couple of contractors. We've had it evaluated and independently reevaluated. What we've decided to do, the expense of moving to the federal exchange is quite high. There's more to it than just picking up however many people we have on it and moving them somewhere else. There are a lot of details that make it expensive and less advantageous to the state from an individual point of view and a state revenue point of view. Our latest evaluation suggested that we should keep it limited. We had, 5 years ago, we thought we'd have individuals enroll, and then very small groups, small business groups, and then finally larger groups. And I think we've pretty much given up on the idea of expanding it any more than it is now. Would keep it mostly at the individual market. And the latest appraisal that we've seen suggests that it makes financial sense and healthcare sense to sort of limp along with what we have and to separate out the human service pieces of it. One of the reasons it's so complicated is we wrapped in a lot of eligibility for this kind of service and that kind of service into the software, and it didn't work. That's one. The second is, what's the future of healthcare? Well, I could probably get elected president if I knew that. But it's, at this point, in Vermont, you said Obamacare though, didn't you?
Yeah.
Did you say Obamacare or in Vermont? In Vermont, we, as you know, backed off from a single payer. The numbers did not work, and those were part of the principles that we had set for ourselves. It couldn't be a net negative on the economy. We backed off the numbers, and we've looked at a number of incremental ways to get closer to having affordable, high-quality health care for everybody. We're still a ways away from that. And the latest iteration that, well, it was in the bill all along, that was approved by Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, is something called an ACO. It's an accountable healthcare organization. You may remember from 20 years ago or something or so, HMOs, which left a bad taste in everybody's mouth. What they said was, we'll take all these people all the people in this room, we'll take care of them, and we figure, looking at individuals and how old they are and where they live, this is about what it should cost. And if I do a better job of keeping you all healthy and it doesn't cost as much, I get to keep the money. And if I don't do a good job in keeping you all healthy, then I take a risk. I may lose some money. So the way they handled that 20 years ago was they just stopped giving people care. They were gatekeepers. This newer iteration has the same kind of risk. You look at a population, you figure, oh, there's some old people, some young people, some chronically ill, whatever, you've got mental health and substance abuse. This is what it's going to cost. If you do a good job of keeping people healthy and you spend less money as a result of that, you get to keep the money. But through all of this are all these quality measures. I don't know if you've noticed, you get surveys every time you go to the doctors, every time you go to the hospital. You can hardly move without getting a survey. The feds want to know that if I am taking care of all of you, that I'm doing it in a way that seems, that feels good to you, that you think you're getting good care. So that's where we're layering that, the idea that eventually this group, the goal of the largest ACO in Vermont is to spend by 2020, 80% of the money on keeping people healthy and 20% of the money on sick care. It's a pretty big goal, but that's their goal. So that's how things are changing. And then we're all looking at something called an all-payer waiver, whereas all sources of funding would go into this ACO, and they would spread it out. And just looking around the room, and being 67 myself, Medicare is the first thing that comes to our minds. Every person on Medicare has every single right under this system that they would have later on in the ACO. And plus, our proposal to the feds about how we're going to do this adds some benefits. For example, if something happens to you and you go to the hospital for a couple of days, and it's determined that you can't go home, you should go to a care facility of some sort, at the moment, Medicare is not going to pay for you because you weren't in the hospital 3 days. Data has determined that's not always the best way to spend our money. That's something we've asked the feds to do away with, a couple things like that. I'm not sure if my time is up. I have to leave it to the...
It's been up for a while, but that's okay.
You'd have to ask the moderator.
Go right ahead and answer the Obama question.
Yeah, you want me to get stuck, don't you, Tim? I know it. Yeah.
What I hear is a lot of trees and an ignoring of the forest. The forest is that in the United States we spend something like $9,000 a year per person on health care.
More than any country in the world.
Yeah, and the average in the other industrialized countries is about $4,500 a year, which is about half. And on measures of outcomes, healthcare outcomes, in other words, the effectiveness of healthcare, the United States scores at the bottom.
Oh, we're not at the bottom.
I'm going to interrupt you and ask if you can talk into the microphone. It makes for very dull television if the people at home can't hear.
Okay. So in the United States, we spend literally twice as much as the average for other industrialized countries, and we get, according to the most rigorous comparison that is available, a ranking right second from the bottom in terms of the outcomes. So we are way overpaying, and I think that the time for looking for examining the trees and not considering the forest is way long past, and it kind of disturbs me to hear a discussion about adding more trees or changing or trimming the branches under a circumstance like that. Consequently, I have to ask, and this question has disturbed me and been of concern to me for quite some time, particularly since Governor Shumlin renounced what he had promised, which is a single-payer situation here in Vermont. When the decision was finally made to turn away from single-payer, and cost comparisons were entailed in that, did these cost comparisons entail after-tax or pre-tax results? In other words, according to single-payer, the taxes pay for the health care. That's the basis of it all. And if the calculation was made on the basis of ignoring or underemphasizing the fact that the taxes would cover health care, and consequently health care would not be a cost above and beyond the taxes, then it was profoundly unfair, and I want to know the extent to which it was profoundly unfair in precisely that sense.
You want to know how it was unfair, or do you want to know whether it's before or after?
No. I'm saying that if the cost comparisons were pre-tax rather than after-tax, it was profoundly unfair toward single payer, because obviously a single payer is going to mean higher taxes because the taxes are paying for the health care. So I wanted to know the extent to which the taxes were considered in the total calculation. In other words, was it done on a pre-tax basis or on an after-tax basis? The rejection of single payer in Vermont.
It was done, I think they used 21 different scenarios, and Eric, I'm sure I can get you that novel to show you all of the ways that that this was considered and turned over. The main thing in the end, they did before tax and after tax. It's before tax dollars that it makes sense. So, okay, I have it backwards. They did it every single way you can imagine, and I would be glad to send it to you. The people who suffered the most in the picture, no matter how it was cut, were small businesses. When I say small, I mean smaller than Walmart and IBM or whoever they call themselves. But the medium-sized businesses, because so many of them did not provide comprehensive health care. So Eric, if you would like to read it for yourself, I would be happy to get it for you. Just make sure I have your snail mail address. It'll be mailed that way. I think it's too big for email.
Any other legislators have a comment on either the ACOs or the all-payer that we're facing? Okay, we're ready for other questions. Any other topics are open? Yes, step to the microphone, if you will. Identify yourself and go ahead.
Hi, good morning. I'm Dave Silverman. I'm an attorney in Middlebury. I wanted to talk with our legislators about marijuana legalization, a topic that is some people's favorite, mine, not others. I look at marijuana and what's going on in Vermont today, and I see a system that has completely failed. We, as a country, entered prohibition as a public policy about 80 years ago, and it's never succeeded. We haven't succeeded in eradicating marijuana as a widely used drug. We have not succeeded in keeping marijuana out of the hands of our youth. Today, in Vermont, even though selling marijuana, growing marijuana, is a felony, punishable by 15 years in jail, 75% of our high school seniors report that marijuana is easy to get. That's compared to 50% of Vermonters over the age of 35. 75% think it's easy to get marijuana today. 1 in 4 of our high school seniors use pot regularly. That means at least once a month. This is data according to our own Department of Health. And every year they release a survey, and every year the results are the same. We are failing our children. I have 2 school-age children. I don't want to see them go through a system where marijuana is distributed in the high school bathroom. We need to change our approach to this substance. We need to regulate it and make it safe. Safe for our children, safe for adults. And I've heard through my discussions with legislators, Senator Ayer was kind enough to grant me a few minutes over lunch one day a couple of weeks ago. I've heard many concerns. Some concerns around public health, which I think the Health Committee has addressed well. I've heard a lot of questions asked, well, you know, we don't know all the details. We don't know all the risks. And I never quite get to the specifics. So my question to the legislators here are, what questions do you have? How can we answer those questions for you so that you can make an informed decision when S-241 moves to the House next week? And so I'll throw that to you. Please ask me the questions and I will get back to you via email with the answers. These answers exist. We have decades of experience and statistics and knowledge of exactly what happens when you legalize marijuana in various different scenarios. I'll be glad to answer those questions. Thank you.
Any legislators want to attempt that?
I didn't hear a question.
Should I rephrase that?
Whether you have any questions?
The question was, what specific questions do legislators still have after 100 hours of testimony in health and welfare and judiciary and government operations and finance? What questions are still out there? Because I keep hearing and reading in the press that the questions have not been answered yet. So let's get those questions out there and let's get them answered so that our legislators can make an informed decision.
Are there legislators with questions?
I can speak for my colleagues. There's a lot of division in the Senate. It's not a slam dunk in the Senate when it finally comes to the floor. And I think the biggest question is about kids. Are they going to be better off or not? Are they going to be less well off as a result of legalization? Looking at the data. The second set of questions is around traffic safety. Will we be better off with different kinds of more comprehensive testing and better educated police catching? Will we be better off or will we not be better off? And I can't remember what the third question was. There's traffic safety. Oh, and regulating and in the illegal drug market as it is now. One of our concerns was people, I don't know if you remember, we had a deaths, mostly in the Rutland area a few years ago. People were buying one thing and it was laced with something else and they died. So in terms of the quality of marijuana, will we be better off under regulation or not? Those are the three big questions that I hear in the Senate.
Claire has the advantage. She's been in the Senate working on it. I also guess that as far as business goes, for myself and listening to what Colorado's gone through with their high cash volume and banks having difficulties, dealing with the fiscal part of it. Obviously, the children is a big concern. And then, I think looking at it, we, as the Ag Committee, had our chair and vice chair spend some time in Colorado. And one of the things that hit me was the electric bills that they're seeing over there. So, I think from an economic standpoint too, is Green Mountain Power ready for this? $40,000 a month. We have three-phase issues already with businesses that I'm aware of that wish they could have three-phase. I'm a homeowner with geothermal and I can't even get three-phase. So, I think we need to look at the grand picture of it. Obviously, children are at the forefront. I had a gentleman say to me the other day, if you vote yes for marijuana, I would expect that you have drug testing in there for students that are in high school, student athletes. So, there's some big concerns about it. Anytime that we look at legislation, one out on the streets like myself just 2 years ago might think, gosh, why didn't they pass that? Or why did they pass that? And then, when you're sitting in the seat and you look at the bill in its entirety, there's always, one or two things that just don't set well with you as a legislator. So, I think it's important for us to look at the total picture, not just zero in on the small part of it. Thank you.
Harvey?
Yeah, this is one of the most difficult issues that we're going to be facing this year. And, when you were talking about exposure to the young people, and they can get marijuana easily now in our school system, and I'm wondering if they can have less access to it if it's sitting in the living room at everybody's home. And alcohol is a perfect example of that. We have an opiate drug addiction problem in the state. And part of that is because they go fishing through the medicine cabinet and pick out whatever they have in there and see what it does to them, just trial and error. And some people get hooked for some reason. I don't know why it happens. I don't know why some people are more susceptible to being connected as another. But when I look at the health and safety of this, I really don't see that legalizing it is going to correct the problems we have. And I know that we have a failed system now, but I'm not sure just opening it up is going to make it any less of a problem we face as a society. So, and when I would, you know, I've been trying to understand this. I've been trying to research it and follow the issues, so I get the pros and the cons, and I've got a nice little file of these things in my iPad. And, you know, I was looking at the report from the hospital visits in Colorado, and for young people, hospital visits related to marijuana use has increased substantially over the last year or so. So, you know, it's not an easy thing to get a handle on what is absolutely right on this. But I think it's, as Claire said, it's taken some time to get it through the Senate. And I'm not sure if it's through the Senate yet. It's still there, and I think she also said that it's not a definite that it is going to make it through the Senate. And I know this isn't a Republican, an independent, a Democrat issue. This is a societal issue that we're working on, trying to find it. There isn't any clear line. So it's going to take some study and research.
This is a follow-up, another piece that came to my mind as I'm sitting there, is, you know, last year I guess I was surprised when the budget was put together for this year that they took out the surveillance that's done by the Vermont Police Department. So homegrown, if it's still being grown in folks' backyards, then I think we need to have that in the budget. And so, you know, those are things that I look at that are contradictory. If we're going to pass a bill and eliminate the ability for it to be grown at home, then we ought to have it in the budget for police to be able to go out and see what's going on in our backyards. So, thank you.
There's a third and fourth question, since Claire so kindly put out 3 of the questions. What about the health issue? We spend so much money on stopping kids from smoking. You mean there's no health issue with marijuana smoking? And the second piece of that is the federal relationship. Whether we legalize it in Vermont or don't legalize it in Vermont, it's still illegal federally. How do we accept federal funds? How do we get around that? How do our insurers insure us if we're going to grow it? What are all those questions about the federal relationship?
I can answer what we with what we've taken in testimony in the Senate, and starting with Allison's questions. One thing she raised was about that banking. We actually have a credit union in Montpelier, who is dealing with the medical marijuana facilities and foresees being able to do the banking for any other, you know, the retail places that might open in 2018. And remember, this won't start until 2018, the actual being able to purchase marijuana. The second thing I thought I heard her mention was about electricity bills. And that occurred to me too, because I know they're enormous. So one of the things that Senate Finance added to the bill was that there needed to be a consideration of energy, their plans for obtaining enough energy for a grow, that has to be part of the application. Harvey mentioned getting drugs at home, the old-fashioned way of getting alcohol and opiates. Just for your information, 80% of people who are addicted to opioids and heroin got started on legally prescribed drugs, something they found in grandma's medicine cabinet or the neighborhood kid took out of their medicine cabinet. So that's an issue. It turns out that with marijuana, the number of people who get into real trouble with marijuana are the same as the people who get in real trouble with alcohol. It's about 7 or 8% who become alcoholics, and they're finding that rate. Although, because it's been illegal, we don't have a lot of good data. For example, traffic safety. Colorado did a bunch of surveys on after they legalized marijuana and realized they had nothing to compare it to. They also realized that blood tests, if you smoke marijuana, can stay in your bloodstream for 30 days. Even though you got high 30 days ago, it's still in there. So there are new ways coming online. That's an issue. How do we test for it? Then they stopped taking blood samples at the scenes of crashes. Then they changed the limit and started taking them again. So none of the data means a thing because they cut the limit in half and they doubled the people they had, but they didn't have anybody before. So it's one of the other issues is we have to have good data. The Department of Health and the Department of Public Safety have to really get in there and figure out how they're going to track that. And then I heard from Allison again about policing. One of the things that's happened is it's not done as a revenue source. The people who've promoted the bill have not promoted it as a revenue source. But the idea is a quarter of it goes to police, drug recognition specialists, and it fills a hole that we've had for a long time in policing. It's not just for marijuana. 25% of it goes to educational and prevention programs. You mentioned the success of the tobacco program. We have a very low rate for teens and youth smoking here. We want the one piece of legislation that my committee put into the bill was a comprehensive prevention outreach program that's based on that model. The tobacco model is out of money. There's no more of that, so we could piggyback onto that. But this program would be aimed at people 25 and below, because we know the brain isn't finished with all its changing and morphing until about 25. And any of you who have young adults in your family can probably recall the time you looked at your son when he was about 25 and you thought, whoa, I think he's grown up. So not all of us, but a lot of us have had those sort of experiences. Let's see, and then that was smoking, police,
Federal relations.
federal. There's something called, I think it's called the Kohler letter, Kohler memo, and it says, and it's sort of a kind of a look the other way memo, and it says to the states, this is what we're worried about. We're worried about youth access. We're worried about traffic safety. We're worried about people coming into your state, buying lots of dope and then driving out of state with it, and that sort of stuff. There were a list of things that the feds are worried about, and it was sort of and what we took from that is if we're mindful of those considerations, in this administration, we'll probably be okay.
Okay. I know there are more questions. All right.
Bill Keys of Bridport. I still have quite a lot of frustration about this. No, I'm against it. But the thing I wonder, and I had an experience with OxyContin one time. I guess I can sympathize a little bit with people that are on drugs now. The doctor prescribed it, and the first night I had a kind of a strange dream. The second night, an even stranger one. It was to help me sleep when he gave it to me for it. It did something, but the third night, boy, I was out of it. I went to the bathroom, I came back in the bedroom, I was leaning on the bed, my wife says, what's the trouble? I didn't really know, I was out of it. Then when we got sobered up again, realized what was happening, we dumped that down the toilet. But I'm wondering, how many more state troopers are we going to have keep this under control? How many more rehab centers do we have to build to take care of these people that are on marijuana?
Go right ahead, Claire.
We asked some of the same questions in Senate Health and Welfare. Well, we did not make a recommendation to go or not to go. We said, if you're going to do this, these are the things you need to worry about. And, geez, I lost my train of thought. What was the question?
Yes, about troopers.
Yes, about troopers. We have a hole in the supply of troopers. For years, we've been understaffed in troopers. And that was, as I said before, that was part of the plan for the revenues. In terms of rehab and those sorts of things, the conclusion we came to is that there are a lot of harms that happen from drugs, opiates, which we're dealing with right now in our committee, marijuana, all those kinds of things. We know that kids get in trouble, that that their grades suffer, that people are impaired and do things they shouldn't be doing. And that's happening right now while it's illegal. So to go back to what a previous speaker said, the harm is being done, and the question is, how do we control it? Can we control it? And it doesn't make any sense to keep doing the same thing and think we're going to get different results. 20 years ago, I tried to buy marijuana for an elderly friend who was dying and was nauseated. That's what was wrecking her life. And I ended up going to someone I didn't know, sweating like a large farm animal because I was so terrified I was making a drug deal, and to buy this stuff for her. And then I had to figure out how to roll it up and all that kind of stuff. But it was an awful thing. So I went to someone, and my guess is if I'd said, well, maybe I don't want that, what else have you got? He didn't ask how old I was, although he was pretty sure I was over 18. But he didn't ask how old I was, and he had plenty of other stuff that he could offer me. In a world where marijuana is legal, at least we won't be having that. We won't be having people go to unscrupulous people who are selling illegal marijuana and who knows what else to anybody.
Other questions or comments?
Ed Payne, Bridport. I think we're not talking about marijuana. We're talking about what the legislature, they'll put their mother out on the street if they think they can get a tax dollar. Sorry. And for the economics of it, with all the stuff, there's price point. Every business knows there's price point. So we have to have our, if we legalize it, we have to have the whole thing competitive with the black market. We got to sell it cheaper than the black market. Anybody researched what marijuana's going for these days and see what our competition is? And then as we speak, we have, well, as Claire said, there's plenty of things. We have to have more police, we have to have this, we have to have that. By the time we get done with the other expenses, are we really going to make the millions on the taxes when we get done? It's a lot of economics. And as far as growing it, we just say anybody that's growing it has to put up their solar panels to to afford electricity. But other than that, I got one comment. I've been hearing Virgins posturing about getting the trucks out of downtown Virgins. I don't know what the legislature has to do with it, but obviously Route 17 ain't a truck route. And I'm sorry, Virgins has lived all these years because there's a confluence. They got to go across people have got to go across the river, and they've had mills there and etc. And they've benefited from the traffic going through there for a long, long time. Now they're getting politically correct and think that they're big enough to wag the transportation department. And I don't know if the legislature has any influence on that, but I think it's a real stupid idea. Thank you.
Anybody want to comment? Unfortunately, we have nobody from transportation here, so. Comments on Virgins?
I'd have to agree that Route 17 is no truck route.
Okay.
A lot of people have called and said
Okay.
the bridge is not considered.
So other questions then? Other questions, comments?
Oh, I'll change the topic. I'm Heidi Willis, and I live in Salisbury, and I'm really concerned about climate change. If we go on as business as usual, the projections are that our population on Earth will be, by 2050, will be about 9 billion people, and in another 100 years, it would be 2 billion people. That is a loss of the total population of the Earth right now due to climate catastrophe. So I'm interested in a tax on carbon, and I know that's been proposed. I think the thinking is that this is not the year to see it passed, but I think it's the year to see it passed, because the price of gasoline right now is so low that were we to add a tax to it, it would be even, it would still be less than what we paid 2 years ago. So I'm just curious, I don't know whether anybody here is in a position to say where that is, but I would encourage all the action on that we can get. We don't have any time to waste.
That's a national issue, and it can't be addressed simply.
Are there legislators that would like to answer? Any of the legislators?
I'll just give my personal take on it and where I stand at the moment. For myself, I said earlier, we have geothermal heating and cooling. We've had it for 8 years, and I rock around in a Prius when I don't have the family. So I too have cared for years about where we're going with this. However, again, I would say when I vote on bills in the legislature, I don't just look at the analogy of what we're trying to accomplish. I always look at the underlying of, okay, we're raising 88 cents, where is it going, how is it going out? Just like I said to you, it doesn't fit for me well that right now we have no money going out for surveillance of marijuana being grown in backyards. Well, when I'm going to be voting on a bill of that nature, I want to make sure it's in there. So at this point, 88 cents is a very large tax, and we've heard our folks that are living in poverty say to us, you know, this gas price is a difference between them walking to work, riding a bike to work, and not being able to afford to get their families around. So that at the same time is a class that, you know, we're taking care of in other ways. So I'm always apprehensive to go ahead and say, yeah, 88 cents, let's tax it. So I'll be watching it. I do definitely support, you know, the efforts, but I have to look at the other issues and what it affects at the same time.
Yes. Would you, yes, go to the microphone if you would, please. Thank you.
It seems to me to be inappropriate to be talking about the possibility of a carbon tax being imposed in our small state, given the reality of the drop in the bucket that would consist of, and given the reality that there would be a lot of other states, not to speak of nations, that would not join with a similar tax, which consequently would crush our local economy. I mean, there are international issues, there are national issues, and there are state issues. I don't think that this is appropriate to be considered as merely a state issue. It should be addressed on the national level and certainly beyond that. That is my opinion.
Unfortunately, we've seen on the national level how we can get along or not get along in DC. You know, and the picture's huge. When you're sitting in Montpelier and you look at things that just Vermont's done, and I know that this probably won't ring too loud in many of your ears, but we do have some good things going on. Harvey was there when they implemented the Working Lands Enterprise, and he can probably speak about that. In Farm to Plate, these are little things that Vermont did that made a huge impact on the national level. We have our Secretary of Ag down there who's a leader in Washington, D.C. on these issues, and it's put money into our economy, and even Harvey, I think, would agree that it's been money well spent. So, you know, when I heard the 88-cent tax and I got a box of postcards, which I'm sure both Claire and Harvey can speak to their box of postcards supporting it, originally when it hit my desk, I was like, whoa, you know, that's something I can't support. But you know, I try not to take a stance too early in the game. I always want to look at what is the purpose of this, who is it going to affect, where's the money going, and I try to be optimistic about what are our intentions. I'm definitely not out there, and if you look, I'm not one to support taxes. So for me, this is a tough issue.
Harvey?
Yeah, I agree with some of the comments that have already been made. This is a national and international issue more than it is a Vermont issue. But I will say that Vermont has taken a lead at trying to solve this problem in a variety of ways. And Allison alluded to the work in lands and buying food locally versus having it transported all across the nation or from other foreign countries to come here. And I think, you know, that is a spot. We put quite an investment, and some is controversial now, about how we generate our electricity, you know, with the wind and the solar and hydro. Hydro is going to be very hard to increase the amount of production we can get out of that unless we go out of state to purchase it, and we could still do that. But I look at the carbon tax, and I got a huge box of postcards. It didn't come individual postcards in the mail. It came in a box. And so I probably had 350 to 400 postcards. So I started calling the folks that sent me this postcard. And I see one person in the room that sent me a postcard. And I asked him about it. And he said, wow, gee, you know, we do need to do something about climate change and what's happening. But no, I don't really support the carbon tax. I think a lot of the people that sent us the postcard didn't realize, even though it said right on the postcard, that they're supporting, you know, our carbon tax, because every person I talked to didn't support the carbon tax and didn't realize they'd sent me a postcard. So I think we need to be very careful and do what we can do. I'm very much in favor of the local food movement, and yet that is going to be facing some challenges. We have in the House Agriculture Committee right now a bill dealing with the Federal Food Safety Marketing Act or something like that. I forgot now the name of it, but what it is, FDA has come up with a new set of rules that all our local producers need to follow. And it's very complicated. It's huge. I tried reading down through the rules, and I find out when I understand one piece of the rule, I found out that there's another 25 pieces that I haven't looked at yet. And they're huge. I mean, each one's about 50 pages long. So it's not a simple thing to get through. So we're talking about, you know, maybe asking the Agency of Agriculture to step forward and help educate and enforce those federal rules instead of having FDA come in and do it. And that has some challenges for me. So I'm just wondering where we're going with our local foods movement, and if the regulatory process gets too onerous, then we're not going to see what we've been seeing in the last several years of a substantial increase in locally grown, high-quality foods that are entering the marketplace now. So anyways, you know, we can do what we can do to get at climate change, but I'm not sure the carbon tax is the way to go. Matter of fact, I'm quite sure that it's not the way to go. Not in Vermont. Yeah.
Well, can I respond?
Sure.
Okay. I think we have problems sometimes because we hear tax, and the way this tax is proposed, 90% of that money would come back to citizens in Vermont in the form of incentives and grants, and particularly to low-income people, recognizing that transportation may be a challenge and a difficulty for them. And then 10% of the money generated by that tax would be used for weatherization and to work on tightening up our homes and buildings. We operate as if the bottom line is always an economic bottom line. But The ultimate bottom line is an environmental bottom line. If we don't have a functioning, livable environment, we won't have an economy, and it doesn't work the other way around. So there's going to be, and our economic structure doesn't really care if we have a working, livable environment. There are no structures or values in there that say it's important to think about the health of the environment. We have to impose that on the economic structure. So at some point in time, we need to take some action. Little Vermont, you know, the people during World War II who saved 2,500 Jewish children could have said, I can't save all of them, so I'm not going to do anything. So we have to decide morally, do we do what we can do, or do we just kind of say, well, since we're not big enough and we can't change everything, we're not going to do anything. And I'm not going to, just a minute, I don't think, have I gotten my 2 minutes yet? Go ahead. All right, Tim, then all right. But from my point of view, if we want a livable climate for us, we are going to have to do something, and we don't have a lot of time, so.
Okay.
Just think of it. Right now, we're paying, let's say, $1.88 a gallon for gasoline. Let us say that Vermont were to impose a $1 carbon tax on that $1.88 cost, so that gasoline would cost $2.88 in the state of Vermont. How many people would be getting their gas in New Hampshire? How many people would be getting their gas in New York State? How many people would be getting their gas in Massachusetts? How many people would be crossing the border and getting their gas in Canada? I mean, to me, it seems absolutely ridiculous, the very discussion of the possibility of a statewide carbon tax, given the impact that that would have in suppressing the sale of product here in Vermont. I mean, it's like if you had a $20 per pack case, tax for cigarettes here in Vermont, everybody would be going outside the state to do it. Now, what would be the impact on local businesses that might be impacted about this? I mean, if we had twice the cost per gallon for fuel in this state than in other states, what would be the impact upon the businesses here? I mean, it's so irrelevant to be talking about a subject like that in a forum like this, which is a state forum rather than a national forum. This is an appropriate subject to discuss at the national level, certainly at the international level, definitely not at the local level.
Okay, thank you. And just to be very clear that we take all topics regardless of their impact, state or federally. Yes, Senator Ayer.
I think the original question was what's happening in the State House about the carbon tax. But before I do that, I'd like to point out two things. One is that we have a feast here. This is like a wedding breakfast. So I hope that those of you who can eat will take advantage of it. It's delicious. There you go, Tim. And the second thing is I forgot to mention to you that speaking of climate change, Senator Bray is at an energy conference. He's a speaker over in Randolph today, and he couldn't be here. He sends his regards. Excuse me. In terms of what's happening, we have 2 weeks until crossover. This coming week and the week after town meeting week, the money committees where taxes would be have an additional week. And I haven't heard a thing in the Senate about a carbon tax. My guess, and it has to cross from one chamber to the other by that date. If it's not happening now, my guess is that it isn't happening. But the bill that I saw fit Heidi's description in that most of the money in a gasoline tax would go to relieve the people who suffer the most from paying extra in gasoline. Those are people who live in housing out of town and drive cars that aren't energy efficient, generally lower income people, or often lower income people. So,
Thank you, Senator Ayer. Are there other questions or other topics?
Not another question. It's this carbon tax, whether it goes or not, sounds like, I can't remember how many years ago, we had the governor's breakfast luncheon up in Bristol at the Legion. And at that time, he was proposing, I know there's some revenue off the, SNAP tickets, I call them rip-off tickets. And there was a discussion, and I guess it was the commander or someone from the Legion was trying to figure out, and Shumlin said that if they tax it and the money goes to the state, they're going to have, the Legion was going to have more money, realize more money on payback or something from that enterprise. And gasoline is one thing, but we're also talking about all our propane, our heating oil, etc. I am like the commander in at the Legion. Excuse me. If you got $10 that goes through the state, they're going to have 2 to 3 of those dollars for personnel and administration thereof. So you're probably going to be at least 30% less coming back to the people. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Other questions? Anybody have a comment on, actually last week we had a business session with the Chamber of Commerce, and there was a lot of question about mandatory sick leave that's now been passed and sent to the governor's desk. And does any legislator want to mention what's going on there? I understand the governor is going to sign it, but what's in that bill? What's in that new piece?
What's in that bill? I could tell you what's not in it, and that was a small business exemption. What is in it is if you have any worker working over 18 hours, 20 weeks in a year, they start accruing paid leave the first of the year for 1 hour for every 52 hours worked. It was a bill that I was pretty passionate about because I do payroll and bookkeeping at our 2 firms that I own. And what really seemed to be hard for me was the fact that 10 years ago, 11 years ago, we had the birth of our twin boys, and I decided I didn't want to work corporate anymore. And I'm not against paid leave, let's just say that. I don't think it's a place government should stick their nose. So it was tough for me from that aspect, but I saw it through. And the way I explained it at the end was, in the first few years I was in business, I drew a salary of $18,000. So if I have to give paid leave in those first few years in my business, that comes out of my salary, my $18,000. And sometimes I think in the big picture we lose sight of those small pieces that are near and dear to those hearts. And that $18,000, I was working 60, 80 hours a week, put the kids to bed at 8:30, go back down to the office from 10 until 1 or 2 in the morning to get my business to where it is today so I can serve in the legislature. And I have great employees that have paid leave, but it took time for me to get there. So it was disappointing for me that I couldn't get that through. I put 2 amendments in, and I ended up withdrawing them. I was a few short of getting them passed. So at the end, I decided we wouldn't pain the system anymore and have 5 roll calls to a 2.5-hour ad on the end of the day for the 5 small business amendments. But I think Senator Ayer can say the same was true in the Senate. It was very close, and I think the majority of it was around the small business exemption. It was all of it. So for me, you know, it was pretty difficult. My vote explanation was probably very harsh at the end, but I felt like I had to say it. My vote explanation was simple. It just said this vote confirms that folks like myself draw on a salary of $18,000 a year. It doesn't matter that my family can starve as long as I'm providing for everybody else. And that's exactly how I felt about it. I do books for many different businesses, some very large, multi-million-dollar companies down to many small electrician, plumbers, dairy farmers, and they're not getting rich, and they're providing opportunities and jobs, and we have flexibility in our business. My folks can work remotely. Alice and I don't have daycare today. That's great. When the little one's taking a nap, feel free to log in, check your emails, return your phone calls. As long as that stuff's being done and we have the customer contact taken care of, the rest of it can wait until tomorrow. And we have a lot of flexibility. I understand not all small businesses are that way. I wasn't even that way when I started out, but the way I see it is this bill does not allow for us to do that. Another part that concerned me is how many small businesses do we know that have time clocks that can track 1 hour per 52 worked? I know an awful lot that pay stipends or weekly salaries, or even the farms that say, I'll pay you $300 a week plus housing. And we're not tracking time, so it becomes a time management issue as well. The third thing for me was Department of Labor does not have the money to go through and actually make sure we're in compliance, so it's going to be driven on complaint basis, which was a concern for me as well. So it was definitely not a bill that I was supportive of in the nature that it was. I could say that if I wouldn't have been supportive of paid leave because it just doesn't seem like a place government should be, but it was so close to having the exemptions that I thought it needed. If I had gotten my 2 amendments through, I would have voted for it. So it was tough. Spent a lot of time on it and struggled with it. Thank you.
Thank you for doing that. Just as a comment from another small business, mine, we already give sick time to our folks because of the population that we serve, but the effect has been that the legislature has changed what was a benefit to now a right. And if you look at the folks that work for us and for a lot of small businesses in Vermont, rights are very, very different than benefits. That's my only comment. Go ahead, Claire.
Oh, I think we changed a couple of things in the Senate that would somewhat address Allison's concerns. And one was there was an exemption, a year exemption for new businesses and to take into consideration entrepreneurs and things like that who are starting up, who very often go with little or no salary or just money out even during that first year or so. The second thing I want to mention is every single person I spoke to who objected to it said we already do that. So, I don't, there are just a few people who don't do it. And in the work I do and in the life I live, I've got a 6-year-old grandson, and childcare is a huge issue. It's the issue. If people want to work, somebody has to watch the children. It's not just anybody. So if you look at the idea that childcare on average costs $300 a week, and if you're making $10 an hour, that's $400 a week. And the child care center calls and says, your kid's got a fever. Well, most people in this room can remember or have experienced the fact that if you don't come and get your kid out of child care, it's over. You can't take them there anymore. And if the choice is leave your job without leave and lose that $80, or get your kid, the people that we spend actual money to try to get into the workforce, to get them to stay there and have the things that we think most people should have, some security, housing, that sort of thing, they're the ones the most in danger. But the third thing that the Senate did was the implementation for small businesses was put off. And there's going to be, the Department of Labor is supposed to look and see who are those people. A bunch of them we talk about mom and pops. Well, pop doesn't need to insure mom, and mom doesn't need to give sick care. So they're exempt. And some small businesses are 3 or 4 lawyers or 3 or 4 architects. It's not just all grocery stores and mini marts and and those kinds of places where you expect people not to be paying many wages and not to be making a lot of money. And the idea is we'll change it if it's that bad.
Thank you. Harvey?
Yeah, this was another issue that I agree with what Allison had stated. I was basically in the same position. And to alleviate some of that burden, they put in an exemption for employees, or employer exemption for employees that work 18 hours or less in a year's time or exempt, or week's time or exempt. So I think one of the unintended consequences of this, well, let me back up a little bit. The Affordable Care Act requires 30 hours a week before it kicks in that the employer has to pay for, you know, the health care coverage. So we've got 18 hours on this. I think what the unintended consequence is going to be, we're going to have a lot of working poor that are really struggling to make ends meet, that are going to have 18 hours a week work days. And it's going to be very, very costly for those families. And what we're doing is we're pushing down those very families that we're trying to assist. So it was a struggle for me, and I couldn't support the bill in the end. As a small business owner, I always provided that benefit, but on the other hand, the government didn't tell me I had to provide that benefit. We did it because it was the right thing to do.
Allison?
Just a follow-up. Another thing, too, is when we were debating the bill on the floor, I picked up on the fact that there was nothing in the bill that addressed common interest. And what I mean by that is if I own a farm and I also own a packing house, they're two different federal ID numbers. I can then employ somebody under my farm for 18 hours and that same somebody under my packing house for 18 hours and not have to give paid leave to them. So the common ownership was not addressed. Also, the question was asked about accrued hours, whether the time off was to be paid at the wage that the wages were accrued on, or whether it should be paid at the wage they were currently earning at the time they took the sick leave. Now, myself would say the time they took the sick leave, it should be paid at that rate. But this was not addressed in the bill, and Department of Labor does not have rule-making authority over that. So there was some pretty large holes in the bill as far as I see it from a payroll perspective. One of the independents made a motion to send it back to the Economics Committee to get that repaired, and that failed. So it's just not a bill that, and I think too, we're going to see folks, instead of myself starting people off at $20-25 an hour, we're going to see people start their employees off at a lesser rate to accommodate for these fringe benefits that are now part of their pay. So, I think there's a lot of unintended consequences. It's unfortunate.
I just wanted to say, first of all, relative to a point that you made before, which I think is really the core issue here, the distinction between a right, something that's a right versus a privilege. I wanted to relate that to the question of the paid leave in a different sense, which is to say that anything that is a right should be covered by taxes. It is a social entity that is responsible. We are, for example, I think, agreed that the right to clean water is a right, and that should be actually, consequently, it should be paid for governmentally rather than by the individual testing his water and going through the expenses of that. The distinction between a right, something that is a right, and something that is a privilege is what I'm talking about here. We pay as private individuals for privileges. The privilege to have a car or a bigger car. The privilege to take a vacation. These are not something that should be paid for through taxes, and they are not. The whole question of paid leave is based on a misconception of the individual worker's right to paid leave. The individual worker has a right to that because the children have a right to a parent. This means that it should be paid for through taxes, not by the businesses. And that simplifies things, actually, for the very reasons that Allison was talking about and others here have been talking about. It is profoundly unjust, in my opinion, to deal with a right as if it were a privilege and to confuse the financial aspect of taxes with the financial aspect of what the paperwork and the expenses have to be for an individual employer. It's just not appropriate, in my opinion, to deal with the matter as if it were a privilege for the employee, which should be paid for by the employer. It is a right for the employee, which should be paid for by all of us.
Thank you. Did you have another comment, Allison? Okay, we have time for another question, either on the same topic or a different topic.
I have a comment on this recent topic here about the leave bill. Of course, Massachusetts passed it. My son's an executive chef down there. He says, you know, it's not the end of the world, really, okay? But it's very disturbing to sit and listen and hear the working poor are going to get poorer. The working poor are going to get poorer. You're not going to do anything about it. You're going to let them get stomped on again. I mean, we got 1 in 6 people, 100,000 people in Vermont with food insecurity. Many of them children, all around these areas, going to the schools, the poor children. All right, and you're not going to do anything about that? Please, as legislators, don't let that happen. They're already paying enough. They get nothing. Nothing. And you want them to have less? Please, do something about that.
I think Harvey's point was with the 18 hours is we could possibly see businesses limiting the earnings. Of course, we don't want to see them get further in the poor bucket. The other thing was too is as far as you bring up that he was working in restaurant industry, this bill came to life after we had a worker who was sick up in the State House preparing meals. And something else that came to my eyes was the fact that tipped workers would be paid minimum wage. And when you have a work comp situation, they look at the average of a 13-week look back of tips plus wages. And my thought was that they should be paid the average of that, not minimum wage. So I think we'd still see folks calling in sick because they're going to get minimum, or not calling in sick, going to work because otherwise they're just going to get minimum wage.
So has the bill been signed by the governor?
No, it won't, not yet, but he's pretty excited to sign it.
I understand he is, but there's always a way to get a hold of the governor on their 800 number or by email or by any other means that you can urge him not to sign that bill. Obviously, if he's already excited about signing it, it's probably not going anywhere, but at least your ideas would be known by the government before the signing. So that's your opportunity today to go home and call the 800 number or make an email out and send it in to the governor and ask him not to sign it if that's what you believe. Other questions, comments? If not, I don't see anybody jumping up. If not, thank you very much for being here today. Our legislative breakfasts are every Monday. Our next one is back in Bridport at the Bridport Grange on the very last day of the month, the 29th. This is leap year, so everybody get the idea that there's 29 days. So we'll see you next Monday at 7 a.m. And a reminder that there's plenty of food left over there. Everything's by donation, and there's a donation jar out for folks to help us out if they'd like to help us out to defray some of the expenses of having these breakfasts each Monday. Thank you very much for coming.